Welcome, everyone, to the Mount Vernon Charter Review Commission. Today is August 21st, 2024, and it is 6:08 p.m. I'm going to call the meeting to order, and we're going to start with a roll call. Roll call. Pamela Boyd, here. David Rogers.
Here.
Green Bell, present. Raquel Bennett, which she's virtual.
Here.
Brian Dwyer.
Here.
Anitra Hadley. Mary Kingsley. Eileen Lambert. Rosa Blackwell Lawrence.
Present.
Dolores Lopez. Am I saying it? Lopes. Dolores Lopes. Kevin Morrison. Callie Pilgrim. Monica L. Whiting Hogan.
Present.
Okay. Marina K. Williams. Okay, would the advisory board please go around the table and introduce yourself? Susan Lally.
Axel Lieberman. Gabriel Thompson.
Michael Justina.
Peter Morris.
Steve Fesquez.
Okay, and then we also have guests from the administration. Would you introduce yourself?
So Corporation Counsel, Brian.
Tanisha Walters, City Clerk.
Okay, great. We're going to start the meeting. Today, we have the great honor of welcoming Matt Leininger from the National Civic League, who, if you've attended other meetings, you've probably heard are helping to shepherd us through this very important process. I'm going to be quiet now, let Matt introduce himself and get going with our agenda for tonight.
Awesome. So I'm the speaker, but I promise we'll have chances for everyone to be speaking and commenting. And part of the topic here is, of course, public engagement, how you want to engage residents in city charter decisions. And so we want to try to embody some of that in this meeting. So we're going to use Mentimeter. How many people have used live online polling before? Yeah, a few. Okay, awesome. And I like it partly because it's a way to facilitate conversation. You know, it's a way to get a group, and you can do it with an enormous group, get a group really engaged and talking to each other and talking as a large group. So if you have a device, phone, laptop, whatever you got, and of course you can use this on those of you who are virtual can do the same. You can go to menti.com and you enter the code that you see there, 8337215, or you can use the QR code and it'll let you kind of log into this whole session. So we'll be doing a few little quizzes, not quizzes, but like, questions that you can answer and things like that. And, what these things do is it'll kind of compile all the results. So I'm happy to kind of share those with everybody, but just to ensure that we're all clear on this, these are whatever we're going to be kind of entering in here. These are not like binding decisions, by the commission. These are just kind of examples of how you can kind of get people talking about and giving their feedback on some questions you want to ask. So I'm Matt Leininger, and I work for the National Civic League for the center. I run the Center for Democracy Innovation. I'm from Kalamazoo, Michigan originally, which is in fact a real place. I have done democracy work for my whole career. When I say democracy, I mean small d democracy. I mean, not really so much about voting. I mean, voting is super important, obviously. But the stuff that I've been focused on for about 30 years now is how do you give people other ways to have a voice in the things that they care about in their neighborhood, in their city? How do you help them kind of get more active to solve problems together, build bridges, be part of public decision-making about policies, all those sorts of things. So that's the kind of democracy that I really care about and spend a lot of time both studying and trying to practice in various ways, mainly in the US, but I've done some work in other countries as well. So the thing about this, the center, so the Civic League, you may know this, the Civic League is actually America's oldest good governance organization. It was founded in 1894 by Teddy Roosevelt and Louis Brandeis, who were like kind of like a bipartisan power couple of the 1890s. And it was created to kind of deal with some of the problems of the day and figure out how do we plug in innovations into our systems of democracy in ways that would help deal with things like corruption and bad public health and all kinds of problems. And so the Civic League was part of that, 100 years ago, of kind of that wave of changes and reforms to democracy, including things like the model city charter, which the league created in 1902, right? So it was part of this kind of era where they were trying to figure out how do we plug in these innovations. A lot of the kind of the public facing professions we have today, like social work, planning, city management, all kinds of things were kind of created during that era. And the Civic League was in the thick of all that work. We're in the thick of it now, again, and that's the purpose of my center, is to figure out, well, what kinds of innovations do we need to make democracy better in America? We clearly need some things. Democracy at local, state, federal level is not doing all that well. And we're actually kind of not as innovative, not as successful in how our democracy works as lots of other countries. So what do we need to do differently? So that's the purpose of the center. And by the way, anytime you want to interrupt me to ask questions or make comments, I'm open to that. So let's just get warmed up here, and I'm just gonna, give you a couple of softball questions, because that's what you would do in a real live engagement session with a bunch of residents in your neighborhood or your city. You'd ask them some basic question like how long you've lived in Mount Vernon. Less than 5 years, 5 to 20 years, or longer than you want to admit.
Happy to admit.
And I definitely recommend putting in funny answers as one of the possible options for people when you do these sorts of quizzes. Okay, and as I would imagine, you guys you care about your community enough to be part of this commission or to be on the advisory board. So yes, I'm not surprised that many of you have been here for a while. This is a fun tool for these kinds of online things. This is one where you can like put a pin in the map and show where you're from or where you live. This map is I think you can read it. The text is a little bit fuzzy, but
It's good. No, it's clear.
it's kind of a different sort of.
Yeah, I mean, I just
I
moved
think
it,
she moves the
we
dot.
just moved the black
Oh,
line.
there you
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
Ah, okay.
yeah.
Get me, Jefferson's.
How can those of us who are virtual participate?
Yes, yeah. So you can go, if you look at the top, it says menti.com. You go there, go to that website, open a browser, go to that website, and then it'll ask you for this code. And the code's right there at the top. It's 8337215.
Thank
And then-
you.
No problem. All right, I will move on here. Most people, I think, have a chance. Okay. So here's just an open-ended question, and it's kind of about the fundamental purpose of a city charter is to help people in that community work together better. People in government, people who are elected officials, people who are staff, people who are residents, young people, older people, it doesn't matter. How well are people working together? And this is an open-ended question, so you type in a sentence or a couple words or whatever you want to type in, and it's gonna pop up. Doing good, but could be better. Okay. The problem with Zoom is like it obscures some of these for me. Daily well, but there are obvious challenges, not the best.
Yeah.
Local government works not well. Somebody said, oops, depends on the residents and depends on the problem. Anybody want to kind of amplify that a little bit? Say more of what kinds of problems, what kinds of situations?
I'll amplify. I think there are certain problems that the city has that no amount of communication with government are going to fix.
Right.
There's a particular department here that I think is particularly bad, and I don't think the communication matters, like there are deeper problems that need to be fixed. And then there are other things where I think, you have people who are very open to hearing from the community. And when you reach out to them, they do everything in their power to try and fix your problem. And while I think that's good, I don't think that's necessarily the way, problems should get fixed in a well-working government.
Right.
I would like to add some perspective. The Director of Constituent Services, whose job it is actually to engage everybody,
Right.
has, to the best of my knowledge, not responded to anybody who I know within the last 6 or 12 months, right, including neighborhood associations. That should tell you something about the communication.
Other additions?
I think that there's a lot of people working really hard and a lot of residents who want to work really hard. I think there are some structural changes just in the operation.
Yep.
That set people up to fall down.
Yeah.
And so people are trying really hard and they're just banging heads against the wall.
Right. Well, I like the term structural changes, because that is kind of what we're talking about with a charter. You put in structural things that hopefully will be more effective in terms of helping people work together better, both, between city and residents, also within the city departments, things like that. So this is a great opportunity to kind of be ironing out some of those sorts of things. I think people are trying, not sure results are meeting expectations, mixed performance. Lots of what is wrong is hitting the press and the courts. Okay, got it. All right. How are your public meetings? Okay, and when I say a public meetings, what I'm talking about are official public meetings, city council, planning and zoning, the school board could count, although obviously we're talking about local government here primarily. And these are some, different options. And by the way, you can pick more than one of these. So you can pick, I think, up to all of them if you want. But the public meetings are kind of where the rubber hits the road with a lot of this stuff. There's only so much you can do in kind of private one-on-one, sorts of less formal interactions or digital ones. Lots of stuff has to get done in public meetings, and often they don't work as well. So we got usually only a few people show up. That's often the case in my experience. Or if occasionally something controversial has happened and a lot of people show up and they're angry. So I had some person, a city councilman, said to me, "Yeah, our public meetings, we get either crickets or pitchforks." So that is very, very common. People most affected aren't there. Another very common thing in lots of places. The process tends to frustrate people. At your public meetings, do you typically do the usual kind of, the public comment section where people get like 2 minutes or 3 minutes at the mic? Okay.
Three plus one, so 4 minutes total.
Yeah. And that's randomly or first come, first serve, or how does it?
So for city council meetings, they must sign up at the latest 3 o'clock on the meeting day.
Yeah.
And for BOE, they can show up and ask to be heard.
Right.
For the advisory board, I know the planning department did put processes in place where it's listening for whether it's a public hearing or a regular meeting, they have to sign up as well to speak.
Right.
That's not been adopted though,
It hasn't been adopted? Okay.
because public hearings, you cannot require people to sign up. So that was something that they were trying to make happen because of a
Public hearing.
very bad person on Zoom, and but clearly it's not legal to do that, and that was voted down.
Right, but we came to the conclusion that yes, public hearing, absolutely not. People come in, when you're ready to speak, you speak. However, if it's a public meeting,
Correct.
you sign up and you speak.
However, the state sees land use hearings as
Quasi-judicial.
public hearings, not
Okay.
public meetings.
Okay.
Because public meetings, yes, you can require a sign up.
Yeah, so obviously, and this obviously is a point about other things related to the charter. State's laws, open meeting laws are always something you have to be, obeying. And so as you get more in depth into the process, you have to figure out, well, this is what we want to do to make these meetings go better, or do this sort of thing to make things go better. Is it legal according to state of New York? Most state open meetings laws allow for a lot more innovation than people might expect. So there's usually kind of workarounds to things, and there's some, fairly typical kind of things that open meetings laws require, which you can actually are totally fine for good public engagement. But anyway, this is an important thing, is you've got to kind of figure out not just what the community wants, but what the state requires. People on the phone, by the way, please feel free to unmute. If you want to join in here or ask a question or make a comment, please either unmute yourself or put the little hand thing up and I will call it. All right. So which of these applies, would you say, to Mount Vernon? Now, this is one of these slidery things. You can kind of go along you give a kind of a numerical rating to each of these things. Residents trust local government. People understand how government works or not, public input influence decisions or not. You kind of go farther to the left if you feel it doesn't. Residents agree with each other. Elected officials are on the same page. And then again, if people have other thoughts that they want to add, in addition to those different, possibilities you see on screen, please feel free. Surprise, so people, the responses here about understanding how government works, people feel like that's generally the level of knowledge is relatively good for residents. How to be part of a meeting, how to influence the process, how to contact your city council member.
I don't know. No.
All right, so
I thought, was two, like, the left part of the scale was like that, right?
yeah,
Okay.
it's up for a while. Maybe I'll.
But I just want to be clear.
Very common. Okay. Residents agree with each other, then I guess that's the thing that people feel best about, but it's still not that far to the right of the scale. Okay. In trust, some people want to talk about trust, to talk about residents trusting government or not. How about the other way around? People feel like government officials and staff trust their constituents.
Yeah.
That's very common in my experience, and partly it's because most of the official opportunities we have for engagement don't actually build trust. And so whether you're sitting at the dais or not, whether you're a staff in the room or a resident or whatever, these are things actually that tend to kind of reduce trust in government and from government to citizens.
You know why that is? That people only interface with the government when they're having a problem?
Definitely, but I think the format. So people come in because they have a problem or a complaint, or there's something they're not happy about. The format by which they have to complain or to kind of register that is a format which generally makes them more frustrated than they were when they came in the room. So there's something to do with process. Process matters and all these sorts of things. Whereas if you come with something that you're concerned about and it actually gets resolved, or you get information you needed, or people heard you or whatever, generally that builds trust. But the levels of trust across the country, trust in government generally is low. More of a local government than state and federal, certainly. The lowest ratings are Congress and so on and so forth. But also levels of trust by elected officials in their constituents are also extremely low. And that doesn't you don't see as much about that in report. So it's definitely an issue. Why does all this matter? Okay, so what makes for a successful progressive community? Understanding least a consensus, certainly, I would say, or at least shared agreement. Otherwise, basic services, trash doesn't get picked up, streets don't get plowed, things like that. Creates cohesiveness between local government and residents. Because government should serve residents, not generally what happens. We have to have a system of government that works for everyone, especially constituents. So clearly it matters. All right. So improving resident government relations will contribute to more positive sentiment about Mount Vernon overall. We don't have a better system, we won't have better results.
Is this going to be available after the meeting?
Yes, right. So it'll produce a PDF, which I can share with you, and everyone can get it. Taxes increasing, we used to feel like we're getting fewer services. All right. So, and Doug, I think, presented, my colleague Doug Linkhart presented and kind of ran through kind of, well, what the heck is a charter? What are the basic elements? This is a rendition of that as well. It affects all kinds of things that the government does, from how they do make decisions to how people are elected, all those sorts of things. The Model City Charter here, this 9th edition, which is 2021, is the first in the history of the charter to embrace engagement and equity as core priorities of local government. So it's different in that sense, and there's a lot of more kind of detail in it. There's both the kind of the official legal stuff, and there's lots of how-to language in there. How do you do engagement well? How do you achieve equity? How do you kind of measure equity? Those sorts of things. All right. And so, kind of break this down a little bit, there's a bunch of different sorts of things that this charter revision process can consider, that you can actually be delving into and figuring out different options for and all that kind of thing. So obviously, formats for public meetings, the city administrator role, or this kind of question of overall form of government, city manager, mayor, council, those sorts of things, how they're balanced. Things like, at-large versus district-based elections, or sometimes you've got systems which kind of blend the two. So you've got some at-large seats, some district-based, nonpartisan voting and local elections. Youth councils are other ways of kind of amplifying youth voice in local governance. That can be something that you kind of establish through a charter. You can create things like engagement commissions, or things that are responsible for overseeing the quality of democracy and engagement in the community, maybe doing an annual report on it, some measurement, issuing recommendations, let's figure that sort of thing. And then I've got anyone want to shout out what others that you've got on the table that you hope this might address?
I guess for me, it would be to make sure that the language in the charter matches what we're actually doing in terms of practice today.
Yep.
So at the very least, to the extent that the current officials know their roles, they can at least try and do them better.
Right.
And legally.
Yeah. In lots of places, charters are way in the background and people don't know what's in them, even people in government. And so part of the process of a revision like this, and in particular doing engagement around it, is it raises these things up for people.
If I may weigh in on that, I think that is a very good point, because our charter is routinely being ignored, right? But our charter is also all over the place and not really up to date. So this obviously opens up the opportunity to say, well, there are a lot of things in the charter that don't make sense, that don't really serve us, right? And case in point, very good, very good remark that it opens the door for people to just ignore it, somewhat wholesale at times.
Right. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, just add to that, I think just getting it to a point, a document, whether streamlined and more precise, that's enforceable.
Yeah. Exactly. When was this current version of the charter? How long has it been in place?
I think.
Corporation Council?
Like, the charter,
60s.
I thought it was in the
Okay.
70s. I mean, over,
Right. So it's pre-internet.
Right.
Right.
Really, really, really long time.
A long time, yeah. Not to say that, obviously, a charter, you don't want it to be too specific. You don't want it to get into details like, what kind of, tech platforms we're going to use. But there are certainly lots of things that changed with the internet that need to be addressed somehow in the way that people get information, the way they give input, the way, council members, interact with their constituents, all these sorts of things.
And it's all, the charter is overly long, it's overly complex where it should be simple.
Yeah.
It's simple strangely where it should be complex. It's internally inconsistent. And yeah, it is, it definitely has the tube TV problem.
Right.
So it has lots of issues.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if you're aware, there was a charter revision commission 5 years ago, I think. Wasn't funded though, so although there were many lofty goals set initially, they had to be.
They were also putting out a fire, right?
Yeah,
Like
it was a rough time in the city government with
Right.
out of control controller.
Right.
So anyway, there were
But those,
four items maybe that made it to the ballot and they passed, 90+%
Okay.
from the public. So, but they were kind of reporting things
Right.
from the controller that was needed at that time. And that the charter would need to be looked at least every 10 years, I think.
Okay.
Was also passed.
So there's a few things at least that are relatively new, but the rest
Yeah, but
of
most
it
of it
is seventies or, yeah, okay.
I would say pre-telephone.
I mean, the great thing they did, as Michael said, is they required another charter. They required that it be
Right.
funded. So they saw the problem.
Yeah.
And they gave us a way to address it,
Good.
which was amazing.
Any other things people want to raise as things, issues that you think the revision process should consider?
I mean, just one, and I don't know if there's an answer to it, but just because we're discussing that point, one thing that is tricky, and I'm not sure what a charter revision or charter can do at all, is, for example, we had a problem with the controller. One of the ballot initiatives was quarterly financial reporting, right? It went onto the ballot, got passed by over 95% of our voters, and then it was ignored. It just didn't happen, right? So it is a question for me, what do you do as a resident? Of course, all you can do is file an Article 78, right? Which is not something that you want to do every day. So the question now is if, because it was a good proposal, it was timely, it was something that should happen anyway, right? That the residents know about the finances of the city on a regular basis. And, but where is the, how do you prevent from having the best charter and the best provisions and it is being ignored? Because at that point, then there is really no mechanism except by 78 to force compliance with the charter.
And that isn't even successful, right? We tried that, right? We tried to get financial documents with the court. The judge gave the order, the comptroller ignored the order, we went and asked the judge to find her in contempt, and the judge refused. Basically said that judges are not equipped to run day-to-day government. And so they expect that elected officials will follow, acknowledge the oath that they took and follow it. And if they don't, then it's for the taxpayers to hold them accountable in the next election. What's the sum of what we got?
So I think that's, that lesson in life has driven many people to believe that there needs to be less power of elected officials because, I mean, quite honestly, the mayor has even said it, the electorate is sometimes part of the problem, so we don't always elect the best people for the job, whatever the reasons that people make the decisions on. And then you're stuck with that person for the term because the state government's not going to take them out. And so I think personally, that's why I feel like we need to remove some of that protection from positions where we've seen abuse before. And those are areas where there's power in one person, and whether it be the mayor having that executive power or the controller having that financial power.
Right.
Not so much with the council, although there's issues there too at times when you get the wrong person, but there's 5. And so, you have hope in numbers that there's going to be a couple of, or the majority that, see things the right way or do things the right way. So personally, that kind of, I think, drives me to say, and, it's not that it's this unique form, it's a government form that exists probably in the majority. And so.
One of the things that I wanted to add about this is that we're talking a lot about the charter, but it feels like from the interviews, a lot of the challenges the city is experiencing doesn't have really that much to do with the charter. It's all about the code. So we can go through all this work, we could put these resolutions on the ballot and it doesn't change a thing, right? Because it's really the bad acts within how people are kind of maneuvering around the code. So if they don't link or tie where you're able to change that, then the work here, I almost feel like is the work here for nothing, because there are a lot of things that we can't change in the code because they aren't an elected official, right? And so we've experienced that. So is the work in the charter or is the work in the city code. And I think that's some of the things that I kind of go back and forth with in doing this.
I think both, right? I think we're doing different work. And I think you could change the code, but if you don't fix the charter, you have the same problem, right? So the charter is your structure, your infrastructure. And the code is the operationalization of your infrastructure. So I think you need to do the work both. I don't think what we're doing here is useless, but you're right, it doesn't end things. You know what I mean?
And, right, I don't think that the work is useless, but I think it's challenging to, because like you said, we could put something on the ballot, we want financial reports, somebody could ignore it, and then there's really no recourse afterwards. And then we wind up spending city money to get someone to comply when they don't have to.
Well, there's some accountability things I think you can put
In the charter.
So that's the question. A way to kind of create more of a process in addition to the kind of the legal process that already have been used. But kind of what would happen, if there's a department or a particular official or whatever who's, what is the process for that? So that I think you can put in the charter. Now,
and we've talked about some of them.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say the exact same thing. If the charter doesn't provide, the city council can change. There's a problem with city council right now. The charter does not provide the power. Revising consent, it doesn't provide the power to have a chief administrative officer or administrator that can remove, it's a very antiquated, siloed, unitary executive sort of mentality. That's very hard and dangerous because like in New York, we can't do a recall of Washington State. You can recall something.
Right.
Can't do that here.
So some things that one could, there are kind of legal changes here tied to the charter that could produce more accountability. And that would give authority. I think it's not actually power, it's authority to certain, so, to the city people in a recall process or a particular official to do certain things. Even so, as you were describing before, legal things, of course, can get bogged down forever in all kinds of things. And so, from my perspective, as a public engagement person, as a small d democracy person, power comes from having lots of people mobilized on a relatively regular basis and a diverse array of people who are informed about stuff, talking to their officials. When you've got that, you've got a lot more power and you've got accountability in a different sort of way. It's different from and compatible with, it complements this official legal authority that you can be instituting through the charter and changes like that. But both, I think, are probably necessary. And when you only have a relatively small set of people and they don't kind of reflect the community at large, you often don't get, what you need to get as far as accountability. So that's my very general statement about democracy and power. Let me just.
There's hope, but not for us.
Sorry?
There's hope, but not for us.
Yeah. Yeah, right. So this leads into this question that I think I've just answered for you, but I'm curious about your answers to kind of why is it important to involve residents in decisions about the charter? Actually, others of you have already answered this as well.
I just think the key to this question and just in general is a well-informed public. And, my opinion is, and I'm not just talking about Mount Vernon, but probably across the country, most of the electorate is not informed and very easily swayed, especially in the world of internet and social media. So, something to be said about, I know this is going to sound really bad, but having less power in the people's hands at times. I'm not advocating for that, and I don't believe that's true. But when you look at the uninformed electorate, it's a hard thing to really. You can't put it in the charter.
Yeah. So I mean, and I agree with all of these answers here. Transparency, because you need their support to actually have the charter take effect. Accountability, quality of life, it's their city, it impacts our entire being. I would add to your point, and to some of the people saying this as well, that this is part of the problem of kind of democracy today, is we have so much information that hits us all the time. Compared to like the early days of the National Civic League, a whole lot of the population was illiterate. And there wasn't all this media, there wasn't all these things. People didn't know, they got very few messages. People had high obedience for authority of all kinds, religious, political, social, whatever. And everything's changed. Deference for authorities peaked in the 70s and has gone down steadily ever since. People's levels of education and literacy and numeracy have gone up steadily, phenomenally for the last 100 years. And we have this thing called the internet. So we also know, of course, that how people learn generally is not by just reading it or seeing it on the web. People learn well in the same way they always have, was by talking about stuff, and interacting with one another and saying, hey, did you see this thing? Or what does that mean? Or what, can we do this? That's, what you need to have in democracy in order for people to actually be informed. It's not simply, I'm going to hit you with the stuff, here, read the charter. They're not going to read the charter. But if they talk about what the charter can do and why it could be better, or how they want it to be better, then, and they do that in some sort of interactive way, that's how people learn. And we know that from, decades of K-12, research about how kids learn and how adults learn. It's all about conversation. It's all about interaction. So making that engaging in terms of how you kind of get people to talk about charter that achieves the same goal of helping people be informed. There it is. Can't see the ones on the right. Residents provide a fresh perspective, affects their life, property, investment. Yeah, these are all. Okay, so enough of me for a second. Turn to your neighbor, a few minutes. Talk about what are your main takeaways so far. What main questions do you have? We'll come back together to hear what you've talked about. But
Takeaways from this
today. Yeah.
Okay, who are you talking to?
Who's your name?
Pressure on.
If we can't.
I don't.
Depends on us writing. Some other areas to say.
Or they don't know.
Yeah.
So, like, how many people talk about, come to this meeting, but they don't know what I'm talking about. They was very much it's up to you to figure out the different issues and things.
The state does.
It seems like you're gonna
I think it's, I think it's up to us to know. Sure.
Yes.
You can't have an Excel. You should.
Great.
And I advise. From their perspective, they can't. You know what?
All have to have some kind
Well,
of.
they do.
And I don't know how we're local, we can't. Well, it's in the for government, they take care of the people who are.
Right.
Yes. So I know I can't go out there and talk about stuff and not ever talk about that. Right? That's what I think. Then it
it's a purple king. Right now, we're writing up the issue, you know, what's the history, what did they say about this?
So that is.
Or we're saying,
I know, I mean, it's like with the right part that
you're gonna
Understand
you
exactly.
know, what I'm talking about, and the, even remember, even in June, right? Temperatures are out until the talk about the environment, because I think that. So they're aware, we're not using this. I mean,
Cause you get one bad player.
right, so it's where
Everyone in mind, the city, so a lot of mayor kind of put one out there. That was one of the things.
saying, when you touch on that,
And I
go
think
there, everywhere in the police.
What's the best? To me, I was my mind, it's like, you know, so I understand
Every issue that, that's what you do, so you took the election of the mayor because. So yeah, it's a background of the issue. Issues what we call state that, on this, so they.
And I don't think anyone did that. That was one of
No, I missed the purpose of going out. The team that has curved up. That's here's what those things mean. Period, right? We're not setting anything up for them, you know, what we use, because it. The way that can be. Here's the things been shown that we have this council. I think what Mary and I did. And I looked at like I don't know, to me, everybody. It's it wasn't clear about what it is. What's the point? You know, I think.
When I hopefully I level up. So basically, people are more advanced to chunks and
And I think, you know, even though
it's not just
I think it should be everyone, find it,
so,
and, you know,
and it's just
So that's kind of lag.
I think that we try to make sure that
Because we are kind of operating.
that there is a charter.
You know.
I think that's what we are trying to fight.
Really expressed a lot.
And some of the people can find it. You know, and I have to go search.
No matter, I think a lot of times people see down and
Start searching.
you know, they're just like, you know, when you could have started, I'm just could really like.
Right, they're like, no, you know, we're really getting. Everybody, you know, no, it's like that.
It was unfair, right?
That's right, what they realize, what they this like that.
It's not money, you want to get the information they need. To make sense. We're not making it.
Right.
Well, it's, this is complex.
No, but
Like,
it's probably
right?
figure out if it's kind of now, like, you really would be
I
talking.
think you need to make some help. And I can make a choice.
Any of us know.
Yes.
That was better.
You know.
But you know,
So, you know, I guess.
Oh, they are. I mean, a lot of people, some people think they're right, you have like things to win. Right, you know, and the win, so get married.
It's gonna.
Really,
like,
I mean, that's exactly, you know why you didn't.
And why you manage that.
Right.
And.
Whatever, right, you know, would be that. It's that, you know, like, put the guardrail.
How many,
Regular, yeah, I mean, I hate for us to bite on more than. But that have to do with what they don't do things.
Trying to make sure.
I know. Yeah, it's always happens, you know, like, making people talk to each other, then you have to
Everyone,
get back together and like.
back together.
Back.
Asshole to-
No, this is good.
Expanding the charter commission.
That's right.
He solved all the problems.
Good.
Did he?
Well, all right, how did you?
It was like.
What new things came up or new takeaways?
Anybody.
Take my cat.
I don't know if our takeaways were new. I think we're discussing, like from all of the interviews, if I'm paraphrasing correctly, just, you know, there's this discussion between professional management and what we have now. How do we move forward as a city? The things that we can do to make sure that the electorate, you know, gets what they need, but also that the electorate is just, how do I say this? May not be as savvy as about how, you know, government should work. And then there's a level of trust too. That's my homework.
Yeah.
In terms of, you know, trusting that the people you have put in place are gonna do what they say they're gonna do and move us forward. But those were my takeaways.
Yeah, I think similar, it was about putting the infrastructure in place so that the government can do better, because in my opinion, people don't know much about municipal government because they really shouldn't have to. It's like having Donald Trump as president, it's like you're aware of who he is every day of every year, whereas you know, if you have a decent person there, you don't have to pay attention every day to what they're doing. You have a competent person there doing a job, and you only notice when they don't do their job. Which is why you only interface with them when you're complaining, because you're here saying, hey, yo, what the hell? No one's picking up my trash. Nobody's taking care of the park or whatever, right? It's a negative review bias. And I think that, yeah, I just don't think people are ever gonna really understand municipal government.
So, oh, sorry.
Yeah, just to kind of build on it, what we were talking about is, you know, there's no shortage of problems or challenges in the city, right? So what can we do as a commission that's realistic, attainable? And it may not be the ultimate vision where we think we need to go, but how do we move that ball forward in the next couple of years to enable the next group to pick it up? And as you were saying, help the government do a better job now. Like, what are those few things that are most impactful? And then move it forward, because we're not going to fix all the problems all at once.
All right, we have a comment.
Sorry. Oh, go ahead, Raquel. And then we'll go to you.
Hi, everyone. Sorry I couldn't be there. I had surgery not long ago, so I'm kind of out of commission. But I think one of the things that I will say I disagree with is that I know that some people in the city don't have enough knowledge about government and how it works, but I think educating them is a part of the process of getting the buy-in that we need in developing a shared vision, because we haven't really done that within our school systems or taken control of those kinds of initiatives as a city agency. We have some of the challenges that we currently have because people either know a part of the story or don't know any of the story. So without that knowledge, you're not going to be able to have the best kind of participation that you would want to have from your citizens, because they don't have the information, and the information that they do have, people know it's incomplete. People know that they don't have all the information that they need to make some of the decisions that people would like for them to make, because they've been kept in the dark, either because of their experiences or on purpose. So, you know, I know the buy-in that has gone down with government leadership since, you said, around the 60s or 70s. Well, that's because people are more educated and they know better. You know, if you're going to compare the, you know, pre-1970, pre-1960, well, that's the era of Jim Crow. Is that okay? It's not. So the Project 2025 would have some of us think otherwise. But I think if we inform the city, if we continue to do the info sessions in the town halls, it will go a long way in just for people to understand what the resources are in the city and how we can work together for the best outcomes for the city. Because right now, there isn't necessarily a lot of trust. There isn't a lot of buy-in, if you will. There is a lot of doubt about our elected officials, and it's because people really don't know what's going on, and the people that should be educating them, many of them are hesitant to do so. So I think there's a lot of work to be done. So even when we complete this revision in our charter, it's important for us to connect it with not just the people that we're interviewing, but with the city at large.
I think Raquel was sitting and listening to our conversation. Raquel, we had the exact conversation. Like, it burns me a little bit that people don't have the information. This is why I thought it was really important to move this part of this process up so far. And so then they make bad decisions. Then we criticize them for making bad decisions when they didn't have all the information that they needed to make good decisions, or they weren't given great choices, frankly.
Sure.
And I think part of making good decisions is having information. Like, we were talking about the fact that I would consider, and I know some people don't feel this way, but I would consider us successful if at the end of this process, we had people making intelligent decisions about what they were voting for. If ultimately they have a reason for not going the way that I might want them to go, if I feel like they made that decision informed and with good information, I still feel like I did what I came here to do.
Sure.
That was
You were waiting. Go ahead. You were in line.
No, I'm good.
Okay. All right. Who else? Somebody else? Go ahead.
One thing along those lines, and it is a super hard, a tough nut to crack, and I certainly haven't figured it out, and I don't know anybody who has that. We have very, very low general participation in pretty much everything. We had the comprehensive plan, we had the police reform commission, and if you look at the actual numbers, they're very, very low. They engage in numbers, and it's usually the same people, right? That are very engaged. It's somewhat, and what we're doing right now, ultimately maybe ballot proposals, right? And given the very low voter turnout that we have here, it's sort of begs the question sometimes what the mandate really is, right? And I think that also applies to elections, right? If you have, I don't know, overall 7-8% maybe of the electorate decide who's going to be in office, right? It's for me, that's a problem, right? And I've spent many hours trying to get people engaged, but so far I have not really seen it happen with whatever people try, what City Hall tried on a scale. The flip side is I've been plenty engaged. I ran a neighborhood organization for a long time. I tried to get people engaged, draw them out, inform them. And then usually we get ignored by City Hall, right? That burns people out. And I think that is part of the problem in Mount Vernon. I know many people who used to participate in the process and just don't do it anymore, right? And coming back to the trust building that you said earlier, right? This is not something that we're talking about decades of trust that was undermined, right? And it is hard to reverse that.
Yeah. So I mean, governance has a lot of different parts to it and lots of different decisions to it. And a lot of the things that our public employees or elected officials do are not things that you as a resident want to be involved in or want to be consulted on. But there are certainly some things that you do. So part of the question here, the charter and in general is, okay, what are the different types of things here? What types of decisions should people have a say on for the community? What kinds of things do we need people's help with? In what ways do we kind of reframe the responsibilities of governance? And that is true no matter what form you have. A lot of city managers have said to me, I don't understand now. I came up, went to school, I started as a city manager, and I thought the whole deal was as long as I was efficient, especially financially effective, as long as I was honest, And as long as I was transparent, that people would like they would, like the job I was doing. And it hasn't been true. They feel that even though they're kind of embodying what they feel to be the professional ethics and all their skills that they went to school for and all that, even though they're doing the best job they can, the public mistrusts.
And so how is that being manifested? How do they get that feeling? How are they getting that feedback?
With city managers,
Yeah.
people come up to, in public meetings and yell at them. That's one way. Or they, they don't support, policies or, all kinds of ways. I mean, there's not, and many of the ones that we've been talking about here, people don't support a public policy or a plan that's been taken a long time to develop by electeds and by administrative staff. People are upset about something and they show up at a meeting and they're angry. We've been working with the school board of Mesa, Arizona, which is now hiring 4 security guards for each, in addition to the cop who always was there, for safety at their public meetings because they feel that they have become unsafe spaces. So with these interactions between citizens and government that we've kind of had as part of our cities forever and ever, they've been ineffective for a long time. Now they are, because of polarization, because of all kinds of things, they're unsafe. So there's lots of ways in which city managers are kind of feeling both embattled, undervalued, and unsafe. So, but whatever your form of government is, it can do better, right? We can change these things, and so let me actually use that as a segue and talk more specifically about different kinds of engagement. Screen, go. Slides. All right, so here's my answers added to your answers. There's a lot of the same. Why do we do engagement in the first place? Well, you want, policies that represent what people want. The policies themselves are informed by people's own knowledge about their neighborhoods and their desires and their goals and things like that, and their experiences. Those policies or decisions are more broadly supported. And also recognizing that in a huge number of issues that we're dealing with, we need people to do stuff. It's not within the power of government acting alone or any other institution to actually solve the problem. Government can't solve climate change. Government can't solve all kinds of things we're dealing with. We need people to do stuff. And some of the things we need people to do are very basic behavioral sorts of things. Whether they recycle, how they talk to each other. There's things, how they read to their kids. There's all kinds of things that are in public issues and priorities that are only going to be addressed adequately if you've got a whole lot of people doing a lot of things, including simple things, as well as more complicated things like running for office or raising money or doing all sorts of stuff. So people have problem-solving capacity, and that goes along with this higher level of literacy and all these informational kinds of stuff. People can do stuff. Our systems of governance should be tapping into that. The other thing is that simply strengthening connections between and among has all kinds of other impacts. And this is a whole lot of social science research has gone into this over the last 20 years. When you get people talking to each other, when you build that kind of a stronger network, support network for people, people generally are better able to find jobs. They're better able to find childcare for their kids. Their kids do better in school. People are physically healthier. They're better prepared for hurricanes and earthquakes and things like that. There is a benefit of engagement that even goes beyond people's input on decisions or policies. Things. It's about them and their own health and their well-being. Now, this of course, you don't get this kind of engagement from your average public meeting. We're talking about kind of the way in which people kind of interact with each other all the time or on a regular basis. And so we're talking about a very different sort of engagement that we practice typically in most cities in the US. In other countries, a lot of this engagement is much more social, and I'll talk more about that in a second. So I'll go through some different ways, very different sorts of things. Typical thing, obviously, surveys. I mean, and surveys can be a good and obviously are easier than ever to do. Because of the various things we have, with the internet, you can get people's temperature, on a particular issue or a problem, so you can kind of inform people a bit and you can get a little bit of input back. Surveys are obviously also very limited because, as you've all said, I mean, people aren't necessarily informed about the options you're putting in front of them. They're not quite sure what those options are. They don't know enough about the situation. So just putting up a survey doesn't necessarily do that. The survey, of course, may not be representative. And there's as you probably know, a lot of work and sometimes time and money that goes into getting scientific representative samples of people. And it's really, really hard to do. And then the problem also with surveys that are one-off surveys is that you can't go back to people and say, okay, we surveyed you about housing, last May. Here's what the city did with that information. Here's the new policy or whatever. Or, hey, we've run into some roadblocks here. What do you think we should do about, A, B, or C? So there are some surveys certainly very helpful as part of a kind of a system of engagement. There also can be limited. Survey panels are a kind of a next level of this kind of stuff, a more innovative thing to do. And generally, a survey panel is something where instead of a one-off survey, you're asking people to sign up to basically say, okay, we're going to give you one survey every 3 months, or whatever. Are you particularly interested in this issue versus that issue? You basically give people some choices. What I want to kind of weigh in on. When they sign up, they're giving you their demographic information. So you're immediately knowing kind of how representative my sample, how many women do I have, how many people, how many men, how many people, different ethnic backgrounds or whatever. And so you have a good sense of how your sample, how representative it is at the beginning. You build it over time and make it more diverse over time. Go ahead.
So what you're commenting on, are you talking about this for our process? Or are you talking about it that it would be somehow baked into the government and or the charter? So I'm a little confused as to where you're coming from.
Yeah, but I mean, so basically, good point. And actually I think each of the things I'm going to be talking about are things you could do during the time you're trying to engage people in the charter decision during that period of time. There are also things that you and they might want to do. There may be things you want to put into the charter as ways for local government to be interactive with citizens. So, and that's the best way of getting, talk about giving people a sense of their options. You demonstrate it with them, and they're part of a survey. Then they're more likely to say, oh yeah, okay, yeah, let's do that going forward, or not, or let's change it this way. You're kind of demonstrating what these kind of charter options by kind of basically involving people in some of them. And then the last thing about a survey panels is it does give you this chance to have a feedback loop. So you've got they're on your list, right? So you go back and say, here's what we did with the results of the last survey, or here's some new information you need, or whatever you want to do. So you're kind of building more of a relationship with people, an expanding and diversifying set of people over time.
How does that, so is the survey panels, is there any evidence of how effective that is? Do you have any examples of?
So this picture is from Be Heard Philly, which was one of the first ones. There's one also in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Sorry, where, Philly?
It's called, if you look at the thing here, it's kind of hard to see. It's called Be Heard Philly.
Oh, Be Heard.
Sorry, yeah, it's just the name of it.
It was a city. I'm like, I'm from Philly. I've never heard of Be Heard.
It was a partnership between Temple University and the city to kind of create this thing. And they did find people, were more informed as a result of doing these things. They felt more engaged. They felt more connected. There is some research about these sorts of things, but I think it's also a relatively new thing. It hasn't been done that many places, or that, Charlottesville is another one. There's a couple more now, but it's something to kind of, to think about. And by the way, none of these things that I'm going to be talking about is kind of a magic bullet that solves everything by itself. In general, if you want a diverse array of people to be engaged with stuff, you give them a diverse set of things to be engaged in, because different people want to do different kinds of stuff. Okay, so this is a basic one, small group deliberation. And this is the kind of work, when I started in this field, the wave of innovation that I was kind of jumping into, that was going on at the time, was small group deliberation, particularly on issues of race and difference. And this is like mid-90s, right? And this is right after, O.J. Simpson and Rodney King and all these sorts of things. It was an imperative in local governments. We need to get people talking to each other across their differences, making decisions together. And so a lot of what we know how to do about deliberation comes from that time period. And it's been used now in all these other sorts of issues. But basically, you're talking about small sets of people, 4 to 8, or sometimes 6 to 10, or whatever. But it's a small group. You've got some type of facilitation, and it could be very simple and basic. Somebody who's went to a 1-hour training and learned how to do this. can be more involved in that. But there's somebody who's in charge of helping the group do its work. Making sure nobody dominates, making sure that, they use the time and the information they've got, stuff like that. Generally, also what works is to have people agree to ground rules together. They set their own rules. How are we going to behave together? You can give them some examples, but they decide, yeah, we're not going to interrupt each other. And when they do that, they're less likely to interrupt each other. So there's some kind of tried and true basic things that work in these sorts of things. You don't want to have more than one kind of elected official or city staff person in the group, which is actually quite convenient because that is part of what is in most state open meetings laws. You don't want to have, you can't have, usually it's more than two elected officials in a public meeting. So that works out fine. And that way also the group doesn't kind of revolve around the officials or the staff. They're a participant like everybody else. And then comparison to when I first started doing this sort of stuff, now we've got all kinds of things like Mentimeter using all kinds of devices that most people have now that can instantly aggregate those sorts of things, inform people, give them to kind of, add to make choices or give their decisions, show them what other people said about the same thing. There's all kinds of ways that the technology can connect that kind of intimate, in-person, face-to-face conversation with the sense of the fact of being part of a much larger conversation. So, and this is part of the answer, I think, to some of the things I've been hearing from you about, well, how do we get people engaged? How do we, I try to bring people to meetings. If you're trying to bring people to City Hall, it's always going to be so hard. There's only so many people who are going to do that. And there's only so many people who are going to really, feel comfortable with the language that's being used, with the jargon, with the formats. You got to, in many cases, go where people are and do small discussions. It's kind of very, not intimidating sort of way where people can talk about all kinds of stuff. But you're doing it in a way that you're getting input from them and you're getting information to them. And then and you might be doing that in the church basement or, in the community center or people's living rooms. You're on their turf. They don't have to come to City Hall. But part of the great thing about the devices is they can be in the church basement and like having this conversation and they can answer a question like we were doing. And then instantaneously they can see, oh, actually, 60% of the other people in conversations across the city agree with me or they didn't, so people can get a sense of the whole picture. And there's different, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but there's lots of different ways of doing that, including texting, which is, an even more accessible, tool than lots of other sorts of things. Okay, digital tools, and you've got a zillion of them now. And there are all kinds of things. And this is a very instantly out of date list here because these platforms come and go. But the good thing about them is that a whole lot of them are now free. And a lot of them are easier to use than they were before. And you may have used some of these sorts of things. There's ones that are about kind of getting people's ideas. Hey, how are we going to solve this problem? And you've got these platforms which give people a chance to say, oh, here's my idea. And other people can comment on it or rank it up or down or ask questions about it or whatever. There's all kinds of tools where you can get people's sense of public problems like potholes, graffiti. Do you guys use C-Click-Fix here? Yeah. Okay, so there's things like that. You're taking advantage of people's ability to sense their environment, use their device, and tell, and kind of identify things they want to fix.
We don't know if it's really used.
Right. That's another part. Yeah, exactly. No, true. And that was a big part of the early rollout of C-Click-Fix. It's like, oh, this is a cool tool, but wait a minute, the pothole's still not filled. So there's these things have to kind of, in some combination, live together. Otherwise, you don't have the accountability and the power.
One example, C-Click-Fix, I was checking yesterday. I think there's something like 8,000 reported in the last 3 or 4 years and 0 that have been closed. They're all still.
Yeah.
Oh, I enjoy them every time they come, like 5 years, you reported.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Crowdfunding, e-petitions.
City rolled out a tool where you can.
Games are a great way to.
Hey.
I'm saying a word. Looking at me like
All
that.
right, I'll look at him. He knows, he doesn't look at me because he knows quiet.
You're luck on that.
Troublemakers are.
There's lots of things which, using games that make this stuff fun. I mean, a big part of like, if you want a wider variety of people involved in something, don't make it boring and intimidating, use games. when I was at Public Agenda, which is based near New York, did a project with the neighborhoods around Jamaica Bay, where we did a Family Feud game. We did a Jeopardy version and a Family Feud version, but basically all about kind of people learning about environmental impacts on their neighborhoods and also economic issues that they were facing in their neighborhood. So, find cool, interesting ways to kind of get people involved that way. I don't know, what's the hyper local? Are there local online spaces in Nextdoor? And there are lots of users next door? Okay.
In my neighborhood.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Well, so this is a whole new frontier and it's popped up in the last 10 years, basically. And Nextdoor is the biggest one, but there's also just like email lists and Facebook group pages or whatever for neighborhoods. And this is where people are, and often it's a lot of people. So finding ways to kind of interact in those spaces with people and get people aware of things or voting on things or coming to a meeting or whatever you're trying to do. Part of the problem of most of them is that they lack an in-person element. And so, sometimes some of these spaces end up being places where people are doing racial profiling or all kinds of bad stuff because they're kind of just spreading information which may or may not be true. So if you can combine, just like in lots of other settings, the convenience of the digital with, okay, we're also going to have a meeting every month and people are going to come face to face and we're going to talk about face to face some of the things that came up on the forum, or we're going to kind of decide on some issues we want people to comment on digitally or whatever. If you combine, the kind of the in-person, and the digital in various ways, you can often kind of overcome some of the problems each has by itself.
You can set up events in Nextdoor and have people engaged in that.
Right. Yeah, face-to-face ones, have they been doing that or?
Well, you can set up like an event and like put an address or whatever and have people indicate whether or not they're interested.
There you go. Okay, awesome. And again, it's where they are, so why not go to them? So I won't be late. So polling sorts of things, different Polis is kind of an unusual tool which helps people find common ground in really large groups. But there's all kinds of stuff, and again, in concert usually with something else there, it can be helpful. I also think that some of the simplest forms of engagement are often the best. And the ones that I think have been really amazing are some of these ones that are kind of very regular, very social, usually centered around food. There's 3 different kinds of examples here. On the Table is a Chicago metro-wide thing. It's an annual thing. They get thousands and thousands of people. This is pre-pandemic. It kind of got killed by the pandemic, but it's coming back now. The one on the left is from a small town in West Virginia called Buchanan. And they have a thing called Meet and Eat. It's like a weekly thing. People come to this restaurant every Thursday for lunch, and talk about various public issues. And the way they do it is they put an issue or some kind of question on a little table tent, and you sit at that table which has the issue that you want to talk about. So people are just coming all the time. It's easy, it's convenient, it's fun. They talk about stuff. They can kind of, answer surveys or give their input about something. And the great thing about these is like, you do the work to recruit people, but then they keep coming back. You set something up that they enjoy, that they find meaningful. They build trust, they build relationships. And you've got this kind of regular conduit to people in a neighborhood or something like that. And it's easy to kind of easier to sustain. The one on the bottom right is in St. Paul, Minnesota. It's the West Side neighborhood. It's called the Jane Addams School for Democracy, but it's basically a kind of a weekly meeting between 50 and 200 people in small groups in this neighborhood, which has been very high levels of immigration in the last 20 years.
Sounds like a great idea.
Different ways. So on the Table was the Chicago one is a big initiative, the Chicago Community Trust, big budget. Buchanan has no budget. Basically, people come and I think the restaurant gives them a deal. You can get a low price for your lunch, basically, but that's all there is to it, And so the way that one worked is these people who were not in the city started doing it, and it just kind of got bigger and better, and the word of mouth, and then the sheriff started coming, and then the county economic development director started coming. So you build kind of one way of building power is you build settings where people are coming and they're diverse and they're talking about stuff and they're getting informed and they're making, talking to each other about what they want to see happen. That attracts elected officials and also not just elected, but officials generally, because, if you're elected, you want to get reelected and you want to be where people are. And so there's ways so that one had no budget. It ended up having all kinds of, this picture is actually of the farmer's market that they created in this town. As a result of that, they did a whole new zoning plan based on the kind of input that came out of these meetings. They did all kinds of things. The one at the bottom right was that was a partnership between this neighborhood, the community centers in this neighborhood, and the University of Minnesota, which is next door, so that there was funding in the form of support from the university in terms of facilitators and note takers and stuff like that, and translators. So that was kind of had a budget in a sense, but it was essentially in kind. So the answer is you could spend as much or as little as you probably want, depending on what you're trying to do. And then, I think in a lot of these things, recognizing the power of kids, and that if you want young families, you got to give them opportunities that you can bring kids to. And either there's childcare there, or it's, something that, if it's happening at the restaurant and there's a kid's table or whatever, it's something where it's easy for kids to participate on. And then the other thing is, like, as they get older, youth leaders we think of them often as kind of leaders of tomorrow. They're leaders of today. If you get an 18-year-old who is part of your charter review commission and actively, talking about it in the media or talking about with their peers, that person can bring in all kinds of other people. Older senior citizens want to be with young people in these sorts of things. People want to talk about, talk across generations about some of the issues, especially in situations where, you want to have a community that those kids can then live in and afford to stay in 20 years from now or whatever, or have the education or whatever it is they need to be there. So this kind of cross-generational priorities are really compelling to lots of different kinds of people. And when you have young people kind of leading the charge, you get all kinds of others involved. In all of these things, if you are setting up things where people can deal with each other in a direct way, rather than you're up on the dais and I'm down here. The format of your official public meetings basically creates frustration all by itself, because it creates division, it creates hierarchy, and people that mistrust each other just based on where they're sitting in the room. Right? Create other sorts of settings which are more personable settings.
Like what?
Well, any of these sorts of things.
Okay, like any of these
discussions, based sorts of things. Things where, or the hyperlocal digital kind of network. Things where they're used to engaging with each other in better, more gratifying ways. And actually, if you ask an elected official, what are your best experiences working with your constituents? They will never say the public meeting. They will say, I like it when I have a one-on-one conversation with somebody in the grocery store, or 3 people come to my office. They identify the more informal, the more, kind of give and take sorts of settings, more so than the ones where they're sitting up on the dais, right? So use that and talk when you're talking with elected officials about doing engagement in these other sorts of ways. Keep in mind that when you say engagement or any of these other kinds of words, involvement, participation, they're going to have the official public meeting and the 3 minutes of the microphone in their minds, and which is usually a bad experience for them too, because they're getting yelled at. So you got to be clear that no, we're doing this differently. We're doing it in ways like your conversation in the grocery store. We're trying to embody some of those more productive modes of communication in the ways that we're engaging people in public issues.
So I have a question.
Go for it.
So I'm hearing everything you're saying, and I'm trying to put it in the context of this commission and our limited time frame to not only do the work, but then get the word out or get the word out while we're doing the work. And so I'm trying to find things that you're saying that, may make sense for us. And I'm not finding a lot of that, because they seem a little bit more long-term, need to be organically grown, perhaps. So relative to your involvement with our group, so let's say maybe there are some people around the table who are involved with neighborhood associations.
Yeah.
Seems like a good place to kind of go to kind of spread the word and form those different neighborhoods. Are you going to assist us or those groups or those neighborhood associations to format the meetings, to get things going, to get the word out, all that stuff with the help of the leadership of the board?
That's what I do, yeah.
So is that what we have contracted for?
We're going to develop a plan. So this first initial meeting is to introduce everybody to the concept of public engagement, the different ways you can do it. And then we're going to talk more about what is the best way to do it for us, you know, given what we're trying to accomplish, the time we have, and frankly, Mount Vernon, right?
If I may suggest something, because the city literally just did exactly the same with the comprehensive plan, right? And they did quite a good job, right? So I would really recommend that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel completely again, right?
Yeah.
Because I think that the comp plan was the best outreach effort I've ever seen in the city. Right? If it was successful, that's debatable, but in terms of how much they reached out and how much they have done it. And I think it was actually, my point is just like, it would be worthwhile to at least study that so that you don't discover and
Study
talk
what,
to-
like what you're talking.
The comprehensive plan outreach effort.
And where is that? What's
What
the
happened, what were
study?
you working on, what year?
So
What are we studying? What is it?
So currently there's a comprehensive plan underway in the city of Mount Vernon, where basically it is urban planning to have a comprehensive plan for the city. What is zone, what is the city going to look like? It's been going on for a year and a half, 2 years. And
Well,
then,
not 2 years, but
so the consultants have reached out, had an outreach plan, so they could gather input, and they had multiple meetings. They're still ongoing. They had multiple meetings, neighborhood associations, they had public meetings, they
Right, but
have.
is there a written plan somewhere that you're saying, like, study what they did? What does that mean? What does that? look
Yes, the comprehensive plan is basically what determines how you can.
No, I
like? You're telling me- I know what the comprehensive plan is.
List of the different associations that they went to.
What are they presenting to the public?
Well, no,
But
you're
is it
presenting the plan to the public, but
No.
Is it engaging both sides?
It was a feedback. It was a feedback mechanism to basically get exactly what we hopefully would want to do.
so what,
To get input from the public, what the comprehensive plan should look
right,
like.
well, I'm saying they use surveys, because I remember. filling out-
Exactly, all
filling
kinds
out
of meetings and
surveys.
whatnot.
Right, and meetings, so that's what I'm saying.
And
Like,
if anybody would
what we
have that, it
want
would be the
is-
planning department or the consultants that they just fired.
Yeah, so I mean, the basic principle here is find things that are working in terms of engagement and learn, yeah,
At
exactly.
least learn
Get
from
the
mistakes and
list.
do.
That's, learn, yeah, exactly. And it's,
Sorry, but like, that sounds like a full-time job to me. Is there, like, who has this thing that we would be studying?
no, I don't think
No.
it's a study. I think Axel was just saying that he thinks that was an example of.
Well, yes, studying,
But
yes.
maybe, I don't understand.
No,
what
in the
you're saying.
sense, it's like if we say we want to do outreach and there was just a huge outreach campaign that was done, that was kind of trying to solicit feedback in the same manner, we should not ignore it and say, we're going to start from scratch.
Who did it though? Like,
The
where?
planning department together with the consultant, the city.
what we need to,
The research.
we need to find the person or people or department or whatever
Yes.
who did it, right? They should have a list of all of the groups they identified around the city.
Right.
That's what we want. That's the information we want.
And all of us who went to the meetings and marked it to
Exactly.
them.
Right.
It's a planning department. They
So
have.
you know
Right.
about this.
I was a recipient.
I've done your
of marketing,
surveys.
And I went to a meeting to
Right.
hear what they were proposing. And they did it geographically, from what I recall.
Right.
So I chose to go to the area that was related to my area.
Well,
So I know the Fleetwood Neighborhood Association that Michael Justino, I believe, is the chair of, hosted one of them that I went to.
We hosted one.
It was just a bunch of meetings in churches, local
Right.
churches and places.
Yeah.
They would have a list.
With tables where you enter, it's the exact same thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Just-
so-
And
I think it's
leaders
came through the planning department, so because their planning department will go out and do.
So I mean, in terms of recruitment and you're getting people engaged this is the hardest part of all this work. How do you get to them? Right? And so it sounds like in that effort, and there may be other things that have been successful too, I don't know. But in that effort, they identified where people were, right? So they've got that sort of list, places or groupings. Some of these places are digital online places, not just physical places, but so there's that list. And then there's the people themselves who are influential in those spaces. Because people engage in something because somebody they already know and trust asked them to do so. That's always the way it works.
All of these meetings were blasted out by our council people on their Facebook, on their Instagram, on our city's Instagram, because that's how I find out.
Right,
If I'm on Instagram, and I see it on the story, on the timeline, then that's how I know about it. But I'll find out.
Yeah, city has amazing links. So my point is like they did a very simple outreach effort.
No, definitely. And also somebody said also what, figure out what the mistakes they made, which parts of the community were they not able to reach or why did, how did they, whatever. I mean, that's, certainly that sort of learning, especially about recruitment and networks and trust and who is influential where is hugely helpful.
No question. The goal was to reach people in order for them to do what?
To give opinions on different aspects of community zoning and development.
Yeah,
So
land use.
they talked about parks, they talked about urban environment, building heights, transportation, livability.
Open
Right.
space,
Open space.
public safety, there were always like 8 topics, public safety, open space.
So the thing though, there were at least a half a dozen staff people
Yeah.
were there facilitating and then organizing prior and then accumulating data. So to me, that's the challenge that we would have because we can identify, okay, here are 7 places in the city and organizations that we can tie into. But then who's going to physically run it? Who is going to organize it?
May I?
I don't know. Are you?
No, my point is like, and we had the same thing with the last Charter Revision Commission, right? Like basically pretending that we're not a part of the city. We were called for by the city, we're part of the city, and then if they can do it for the comprehensive plan, they can also do it for this, right? It is not ours. No, I'm just saying, right? So, I think it is absolutely fair to basically ask City Hall that does outreach on a regular basis. They have all the mailing lists to run that, right? Because we are commission that is.
I'm not worried about asking anybody for anything.
Just for a second, really specific to you, because I think this is really easy to figure out. You can just Google number and comprehensive plan, all the meeting lists. But one thing that was a real failure, I felt like with the meetings that I went to, is everything was on Post-it notes this big.
Yeah.
And you had to write it physically, which if you have a big hand like mine, it's very hard. And then you put it all up, which I like physical things.
Right.
And then I asked, hey, can you send me, like, are you gonna take a picture, a PDF, so I can see what everyone else said, because I don't have time to read the 300 Post-it notes in front of me. Some written in cursive, I can barely read cursive, and I never got any response. And it was one meeting, I think that they incorporated them, but there was no like this, remember, and I asked.
Well, it was supposed to be compiled but I don't know if that ever happened, and maybe it did, and if it didn't, it wasn't disseminated after that, so.
The way you did it was like,
If they
20,000 pages above the city.
Right, yeah. No, that's something where digital tools come in really handy.
I feel the way you did it, even as senior citizen, if someone's there to help take a picture of the QR, they have a cell phone.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So did you question at the end of your process, did you measure like your engagement letters, how many levels, how many people you reached, how many responses?
Nobody
you
here
got?
was involved in it.
Oh, I thought.
Well, they have it, but that would be the planning department, right?
We were recipients of the information
Oh,
and participants in the process.
Crystal and I were on the committee.
so do you know?
Still are advisory. Technically, I mean, I participated in quite a few of the outreach meetings. But as far as the data they collected and what they're doing with it, we've seen some reports. There was an initial report where it talked about some results. They did do like a survey where they had maybe 400 respondents to, which they incorporated. So they did share that information.
I guess, how are you measuring the success of it? Like, so you're saying you feel like it was wildly successful.
Well,
What do you
no,
measure?
you're overstating it. I said it was the most successful that I've ever seen, right?
I'd
Because
like to add something.
Go ahead, Raquel, sorry.
The comprehensive plan, it's on the City of Mount Vernon's website if you want to see what the results of it were and where they're at with the plan. I mean, you
I'm
can.
not asking about the plan,
No,
though.
I don't
We're talking
think
about
that's
the
the question,
marketing.
the success of the outreach.
It's
Well,
right, I'm talking about
I think a lot of people went to the planning. I went to at least 2 of them over the years, and I found it through social media, through Mount Vernon's website, their notices, their newsletter. And a lot of people did come out if you have the connections. But like was already said, if we ask the planning office, what were some of the holes they found after the process, I think that's something that can easily be done.
Yeah, Commissioner Rouse is very easy to do.
I think one of the highlights of it as well, 'cause they did have different sessions they had one session in Portuguese, they had a session also in Haitian, Creole. I mean, they had a whole schedule. I mean, I thought it was well advertised and marketed in terms of, making it where anybody felt they could come out and participate.
I agree.
And generally speaking, from what I can speak, because I had quite a few of them, right? And I've done this advocacy for a long time and usually go, right? And nobody comes out, right? And in comparison to other initiatives and campaigns that I have seen, would you agree with me? This was by far the most successful I've ever.
Yeah.
Right? Was it where I think it should be? Of course not, right? But and often what you also get is fatigue, right? That basically you run 1 or 2 and the third one, nobody shows up anymore. And this one specifically and remarkably, people were still coming after I don't know, the 10th meeting, you went into a different neighborhood and there were new people. Often what you also see is you go to 10 meetings and there's the same 10 people always coming. And the comprehensive plan was not like that, right? You went to new neighborhoods and you really saw new people come out, get engaged, get interested. So I think it would just be something good to tie into, at least download some information.
And titles and labels do make a difference. Because if instead of calling it like a public meeting, they called it like community conversations. Right. So that also was something that was welcoming, saying, it's not, so it kind of gets away from what you were saying about the dais and the audience and that being the hierarchy being, not a good, environment, but it's like community conversations. You kind of think in your mind that you're going to be based on the same level.
Yeah.
Of engagement.
Having said that, if I may add one more note, we discussed that earlier. I think, and I'm also speaking from last Charter Revision Commission, this will be tough because urban planning is very tangible, right? I can go to my neighbors. I also ran a neighborhood association for several years. You can go and say this will affect you. Do you want to see high rises there and there or not? And they're like, what? I live there, right? So you have an emotional connection. The same was with the police reform commission. There was also an outreach effort that was right after George Floyd, right? Black Lives Matter. There was a lot of emotional engagement and it was on everybody's radar. The charter is very abstract. So I think if I go to anybody in my neighborhood and talk about charter, the eyes glaze over. The eyes glaze over. So I think, in my opinion, the tough nut to crack will be to make a salient case to people how this will tangibly affect them with an example. If we only say charter and we're thinking about revamping something here and there, I can guarantee you people's eyes will glaze over.
We wouldn't, like Doug spoke, I don't know if you were at the meeting with, where Doug spoke, but he spoke really well about how to do that.
Okay.
And I think, part of the reason I really wanted these guys on board is to help us do that. So, you talk, you don't actually ever have to mention the word charter. You talk about why it should be important to them. Right. And there are different ways to do that. So I agree with you.
Yeah, kind of what even I did, even though knowing that you guys know about what charters are, I still started that way. So, I've gone back, if you want to kind of finish off our exercise here. And again, you can vote for all of the different strategies.
Connect the dots.
Or as many of them, none of them as you want. But I think a word about resources. I mean, part of what's sometimes difficult about presentations like mine is I'm trying to give you these fancy, awesome, successful examples. And some of them had, like the Chicago thing, had lots of money behind it. Some of them don't. But in any case, they had, a lot went into them. Most of them had very humble beginnings. Most small group deliberation processes started out with one group. So most, digital things started out with a small number of. I mean, basically, there are ways to start these things. And as part of our charter revision process, you could do a single meeting that had deliberative small group discussions. You could do something with an online poll as part of it. You could do kind of things that demonstrate this in a relatively achievable, low budget, low effort sort of way that fits what you're trying to do in the time frame you have, but at least also shows, first of all, it's good for what you're trying to get out of it, which is people's input information about the charter, but it also kind of shows them, here's how this can work. And it gives them some faith that it can. Yeah.
So the city does have city events, but it helps if the commission attend those events and have a table that they set up some sort of discourse with the community.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. And anyway, yes. You can also like do things that are kind of like, if you have like a large event, I've seen some communities do it where they either have like little tables where they can get involved talking. That's kind of the low tech sort of way. You can also have like a digital exercise, which is happening during the event, where you're giving people questions as they're milling around at the festival or whatever it is. You're asking them questions, kind of like what we did here, and pointing them to, hey, you want to find out about this? Go to table 4, and you find, go to this part of the room, and you find. So there's ways to kind of, to add a digital level layer on top of the kind of face-to-face that they came there for. But you're piggybacking on the fact that they're already coming for something, right?
And most of these meetings will be held in the same place. Other community meetings are held in those neighborhoods.
Right.
Whether it be the 12-step group or that group or whatever,
Right.
They're just gonna be in those same places.
Right.
I feel like.
More comfortable going. Yeah. Anybody, I had other as an option here, and a couple people said other. Anybody want to shout out, want to say what they meant by other?
Me, it would just be any standing meeting, whether it's a parents association, independent living center type things, where self-help groups are coming together.
Anybody else who's been sticking with us virtually want to, Eileen or Raquel, anybody else want to jump in here near the end?
No, I don't have anything else to say right now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Same.
Okay. So again, I mean, there's lots of different sorts of things. No single thing is usually enough by itself. There's many good combinations. I didn't even talk about citizen assemblies because they're probably the most intensive, most expensive sorts of things to do, but things that are easy and also things that are, more capital intensive. The other thing that's sometimes helpful is to think about these sorts of things as thick or thin. So thick engagement is generally something where you're getting people in some sort of small group somehow where they can talk to each other, learn together, make decisions together. It's harder to do. It takes more time from them, and it's not as violent. Thin engagement is all about the individual. It takes them 30 seconds or a minute. It's usually online, doesn't have to be. Old school thin engagement was you went to the park and you signed a petition that somebody was asking you to sign in the park. But you didn't expect the world to change, didn't have to spend too much time and effort into it. Thick and thin are good for different reasons. They go well together. So as you pick strategies, you pick at least one thick thing and one thin thing. And generally that's a good concept. Yeah.
Okay, can it be also like religious gathering and stuff like that?
Sure, already existing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Because then you get like a in-depth filling of the community where it is, and usually there's like a point person that can then maybe carry that information back. this is, because you're bringing more of them, rather than having, because sometimes some gatherings that you have,
Right.
like if you have an event at Hartley Park, they are more distracted by the
Right.
items of the other booths that's there. But if you come as a community leader, I may not want to use the word, but as that person, like in teams, and
Right.
you have a head captain or something, that person gather
Right.
information, they bring it back. I think that's more of a strategic way
Yeah,
in bringing that information.
yeah, exactly. No, go where they are and-
Yeah.
and empower the people who are.
Then you know what
Yeah,
they're saying.
yeah.
So a lot of times people don't know who to speak to, but they
Right.
have things that need to be addressed. And then depends on who they speak to or voice that concern, they're shut down or they're told, better talk about it behind closed doors, like we were speaking about. So it just gets pushed back until it becomes a bigger issue. So I think go to the source, the
Right.
people, and bring that back and see how you can assess.
So one of the challenges, with that sort of thing used to be simply, giving people enough information and an agenda so that they could feel comfortable doing that work, right? So one thing that actually has been super successful for recently is you have these texting platforms, basically. So what it is essentially, you ask people to text a certain number, text start to a number, and then the texting platform then asks them a question. Hey, do you know about the charter? And here's a paragraph of what a charter is or whatever. Or, do you think that, you can ask them kind of polling questions like this.
Right.
But basically, all that the person has to do is to go to the meeting and say, hey, everybody, let's do this exercise. It'll take 15 minutes. And part of the process usually gets people to talk to each other like we did, or the neighbor. So there's a bit of deliberation, discussion involved. But basically, you're giving the person you're empowering to go to that meeting the agenda, the information, and the feedback tool all in one, all in the form of the phone.
Right, and people are more likely to give information to people that they feel comfortable with.
Right. Exactly.
So then you get that authentic.
That's right.
Real issue.
Right.
And then you're able to address that.
Right.
Rather than you're getting that watered down stuff on the top,
Right.
because people are intimidated in different settings. But if you pick someone to represent,
Right.
then they're bringing everything. you know?
Right. And you're not asking them to make a presentation
No.
about the charter. You're just saying, you're using what they want to bring to you, which is the trust that they have in other people in that network. Awesome. All right. Any other questions about engagement strategies? We're engaged out. Last one, this is just a silly word cloud thing, but what are some words that you would use to describe what you would want Mount Vernon to be like in the future? This is something sometimes I used to do at the end of things like this because it gets people thinking about their aspirations. And it's going to create a word cloud. So just one word or maybe two is plenty. I like enticing. Any last thoughts or questions, things people want to share?
I'll share it out.
Sort of, kind of, maybe.
Meet people where they are. That's what I'm saying.
So is there gonna be food at the next meeting?
Yeah, why would we feel different?
I know.
We talked about the food.
For the community.
Used to do that.
One of them will organize a potluck.
I used to do that, people wouldn't come out, and there was too much talking, so I bought a 65-pound pig and set it up right in the middle of the neighborhood and started grilling them.
Well, that's
And you know
culture,
what,
bro.
80 people came out. No, I mean, it was.
I know, I'm sure.
You gotta meet the people. Right.
Recruitment by alumni.
All right.
I'm happy to. After tonight, happy to take questions or send things, you know.
I think the next thing for us is to talk about like what our plan, the plan.
Read the sections of.
Comp plan, yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to, if you get like a description. I guess it's, right, it hasn't been adopted.
I don't know, I'll reach out to that.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess.
All right, guys, last
Yeah.
opportunity. Any questions? Any more questions for Matt?
What's next?
Are you looking at me?
I know, look at me. I'm gonna collect information that we talked about here from planning. Clerk Walter is gonna help me with that. Once we have that, we'll share with, Matt and NCL, and then we will talk about what can be used from there, what we should change, what our plan should look like.
Right, because now this commission has been together, what now, about 4 months?
Yeah, but you know, like the first, so.
I know.
Let's not even go there.
Right. I always feel pressure when I'm like, okay.
You don't feel pressure. I'll feel the pressure. It's okay. It's all right.
I will send the results of this. And certainly any of the things you end up getting more interested in, I can send resources, examples, links to click on, stuff like that. And certainly thoughts about here's how you might want to use this or adapt it to your purpose, or how you might want to best use this thing in concert with that thing or whatever. That's the kind of stuff that we have a lot of experience with. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel and Eileen, for bearing with us.
What?
Motion to adjourn.
Oh, okay. This says community questions. I'm assuming no one's on. Okay. All right, so, move to adjourn.
You were that motion.
Oh, a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn the
That
meeting.
was the motion.
Thank you. All right, you don't need a, you need a second?
Second.
Right.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. All right, so the meeting.
But I did move, right.
Yes, you did. I know, and you seconded.
Okay, okay.
No, I can't do
do it. That's why I repeated.
All right, meeting adjourned.
We have to vote on it after the second, just for open meeting sake.
So.
We'll do the next.
Aye.
Oh, yeah.